All right, we're about ready to get going in a few minutes.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start now, and I am confident that we'll have quite a few people join us over the next few minutes. We have a good crowd already, though, and our presenter has some really interesting information to share with us tonight. So I want to make sure we give him plenty of time. First of all, my name is Dr. Stephen Payne. I'm the director of the Bronx County Historical Society. Looking at the list of registrants, I recognize many names of people who've registered for tonight's event, and there's quite a few names that I don't recognize. So, welcome to everyone who has never attended a Bronx Historical Society event before, or if you have attended, maybe it was a long time ago. Welcome back, and we look forward to tonight's program. As hopefully many, if not most of you know, we're uh, the kind of historical society covering the entirety of the Bronx. There's other great historical societies that work in the Bronx as well that focus more on, this locale or that locale. And our focus is the entirety of the Bronx. We operate the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage and the Museum of Bronx History. We also have a library and archives and pretty extensive educational programming these days. You can check out more about our organization at bronxhistory.org. That's the short version. Or if you prefer the lengthier version, bronxhistoricalsociety.org. You can also check out our opening hours for our library and archives, as well as our two museums. And if you appreciate tonight's program, always appreciate any donations you're able to make. Just happy to be able to offer so many free programs throughout the year. And tonight's program, I won't say too much about uh, the occasion for tonight's program, but very happy to be a part of the celebration of the 25th anniversary of Forgotten New York. Hopefully, many of you who registered for tonight's event have come across Forgotten New York before. I know even before I started working at the Historical Society, I'd often pull up Forgotten New York to learn about different kind of out of the way places in the different Bronx neighborhoods I've lived in over the years. I'm so excited to welcome Kevin Walsh from Forgotten New York for tonight's presentation. And Kevin will be talking about a variety of neighborhoods in the Bronx. I'll let him say more about that in a second. But just as a quick introduction of Kevin, I'm just going to go ahead and read his bio that you can also find on Forgotten New York. That's forgotten-ny.com is the website. So Kevin Walsh was born in Brooklyn, and we'll forgive him for that. We're here in the Bronx, but love for Brooklyn as well. While Elvis Presley was just getting popular, Walsh graduated from St. Francis College and obtained a certificate from the Center of the Media Arts. He began initial prep for Forgotten New York in 1998 and the site launched March 26, 1999. Forgotten New York's purpose is to highlight neighborhoods, objects, and aspects of New York City that have gone ignored or unnoticed by other guidebooks, websites, and articles. And he's certainly done a phenomenal job at that. So, Kevin, want to go ahead and welcome you. Thank you for presenting tonight.
Well, thanks, Dr. Payne, and I am very appreciative of the opportunity that Bronx Historical Society is giving me to present on my 25th anniversary. Dr. Payne just told me that there were 68 people in the queue, and there's probably more by now. So this is the biggest crowd I've had for one of these things. I've done both live appearances and Zoom appearances. Um, we've been to Near's Tavern in Woodhaven and Bayside Historical. Greater Story has done a couple of things, and I've been to the Old Stone House. I'm sure Dr. Payne is aware of that building in Park Slope. And we've got something else coming up on Wednesday night. We're going to do a 25th anniversary event concentrating on Astoria because we're going to be at the Greater Astoria Historical Society holiday party. And later on, after today's presentation is over, I'm going to ask one or both of the attendees from GAHS to talk about that event because it's open to the public. You don't have to register. I'm doing it in person. So you don't have to register for anything on Zoom. So it ought to be a fun event. That'll be Wednesday night at 7 o'clock at Trinity Church on 31st Street in Astoria. And the Greater Astoria Historical Society members will fill you in on the details of where exactly that is, because at this point, I'm not sure where it is, but I'll know by Wednesday night. Anyway, like it says in the opening slide, we're going to talk about Central and Northwest Bronx. We're going to concentrate on Norwood, Belmont, Kingsbridge Heights, and a little bit of Riverdale. I know I didn't do too much in Riverdale, but because it's so vast that it's worth its own forgotten New York tour of 50 to 60 slides on its own. And at the conclusion of that, we're going to go back in time, going to wind the clock back and look at several images from Forgotten New York from 1999 and 2000 when I was just getting started. A lot of what I photographed back then no longer exists, is no longer in place. And, I have amassed about 700,000 photographs since I started doing this 25 years ago. And I'm 68 years old now, and what I'd like my legacy to be, more than the website itself, or more than the two books that I've authored or co-authored, the legacy I'd like people to remember Forgotten New York by is the wealth of photography that I've done. Every weekend I go out and I get about 200 pictures. So you can imagine 200 pictures times 52, and then you multiply that times 25, and you're in the hundreds of thousands of pictures. And a lot of this stuff is no longer in existence. It's a legacy. Well, enough gabbing. Let's go on. And we've got to take care of a little business first. I'll show you what I mean. Photos are by me and are part of the collection of the Greater Astoria Historical Society. At this point, they're co-owned both by me and by GAHS. And this little slide tells you that you can't screen capture it and try to sell the pictures anywhere because we'll know where you are and we'll get you for that. I'm just kidding. Anyway, our first slide, this picture I took when I was in Norwood just a few weeks ago. I knocked on the door on Saturday, but Dr. Payne wasn't in, only the docent was in. This is the seat of the Bronx Historical Society, the Valentine Varian House. Though Brooklyn and Queens seem to have the lion's share of pre-Revolutionary War houses, There is one in Norwood that qualifies just barely. In 1758, blacksmith Isaac Valentine purchased property from the Dutch Reformed Church at today's Bainbridge Avenue and Van Cortlandt Avenue East. And depending on what account you read, built this fieldstone cottage either in the 1750s or as a successor to a previous home in 1775. Like the old stone house in Brooklyn's Park Slope that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the Valentine Cottage was the scene of a Revolutionary War battle. By 1777, the home was occupied by British and Hessians, but it was recaptured by General William Heath after a brief but fierce battle, which left the house surprisingly intact. We can thank everybody for that. By 1791, the house and land had been sold to an Isaac Varian, whose grandson, Isaac L. Varian, became New York City mayor between 1839 and 1841. After changing hands several times, the house became home to the Bronx County Historical Society in 1965 and was moved across the street. In this photo in 1965, you can see them very carefully uprooting the house and moving it to its present location. Interestingly, Van Cortlandt Avenue East, near where the cottage stands, was the original post road to Boston, which ran from Spuyten east and northeast. The lengthy Boston Road in the Bronx, which runs from 3rd Avenue and Morrisania northeast in past Bronx Park and into the northeast Bronx, the south end of that was not the Boston Post Road. A lot of people think it was, but it wasn't. It was the Boston Post Road dates to the 1600s, while Boston Road, at least the southern section in the Bronx, is relatively new. It goes back to 1800 or so, and was built as a connector between the southern regions of the Bronx and the Post Road to Boston. If you get on Boston Road at 3rd Avenue in Morrisania and you drive northeast, it becomes Route 1, and you will eventually wind up in Boston. If you ever want to take a local road up there, you can do that. We're in Norwood. Norwood obtained its name. Well, there are two schools of thought on how Norwood obtained its name. It's either named for Carlisle Norwood, a friend of Leonard Jerome, or it was simply a contraction of North Woods. I'm not sure which it is, and both of those stories are out there. Now, here's a milestone that I photographed in the yard at the Valentine Varian house, marked NY9. I'm not sure if what post road this was a part of, whether it's the Boston Post Road, because Kingsbridge Avenue was once part of the Boston Post Road, but I'm going to open it back to Dr. Payne. Maybe you could shed some light on this. So go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin, so at the moment I wish I could shed more light than you, but unfortunately, at least, and maybe there's someone in the audience, an old friend of the society who might know. But as far as our own internal records go, there's very little documentation of this. It's one of the handful of objects that kind of have been collected on the grounds of the Bronx Historical Society over the years, and the most information that exists in the catalog is that it's a mile marker from one of many potential roads. They're at one point, there's many roads that mile markers were utilized on. So yeah, I wish I had more specific information than that. Not even entirely sure when this ended up on our grounds, but like I said, if there's anyone in the audience who might be able to clue us in, would welcome that.
Yeah, so we've mentioned the Boston Post Road just now, but there's also the little-known Albany Post Road. We're going to mention that a few slides ahead. My suspicion is that if this was collected anywhere near the Valentine Varian house, It was originally located on Kingsbridge Avenue, which was originally part of Boston Post Road, but that's just my guess. Anyway, north of the Valentine Variant House, we have a oval-shaped park with a couple of oval-shaped roads that surround it. Collectively, they're called the Reservoir Oval. The Bronx and Byram Rivers water system was built between 1880 and 1889 to supply those sections of the Bronx not served by the old Croton Aqueduct via pipeline from the Bronx River and the upstate Byram River and Kensico Reservoir. Water was stored in the Williamsbridge Receiving Reservoir, built in 1888 in Norwood, northeast of Bainbridge Avenue and East 207th Street. By 1925, this reservoir was no longer needed, and it was drained and filled in. In 1937, New York City Parks Commissioner Robert Moses constructed a new playground and park in the space vacated by the reservoir. Reservoir Oval, just to the north of Bronx Historical, surrounds this former reservoir. And there's one more artifact that is associated with that reservoir, and that's on the next slide. At Reservoir Oval and Putnam Place, you will find the old Reservoir Keeper's Stone House, built in 1889. The stones used to build the house were pieces of granite taken from the excavation of the reservoir it was to serve. After the reservoir was drained, it became a private residence for 5 decades and has been under the protection of the Mosholu Preservationist Corporation, which it serves as the organization's headquarters. The local publication Norwood News also has its offices in the building. Here's another landmarked building found in Norwood, the 52nd Precinct Station House, one of the city's great brick clock towers, ranking with Woodhaven's, Lalonde's, and Grosjean's kitchenware factory, can be found at this police station house at Webster Avenue and Mosholu Parkway. The clock is surrounded by colorful terracotta. The tower's design is based on Tuscan villas. The police station was designated a New York City individual landmark in 1974 and was added to the State and National Register of Historic Places in 1982. Nearby is Frisch Field, F-R-I-S-C-H, Frisch Field, named for baseball's Frankie Frisch, the Fordham Flash, who starred with the New York Giants and St. Louis Cardinals from 1919 to 1937. Up next is another of Norwood's notable buildings, this one considerably newer and of a much different design. St. Brendan's Church. Now, an alternate name for Norwood was once Brendanville, because St. Brendan's Church is an old parish, yet this building is relatively new. Norwood was originally part of the Varian family's dairy farm. The Varians, who produced a New York City mayor, own the oldest house in the area, which we've seen earlier, the seat of the Bronx County Historical Society. The neighborhood was laid out in 1889 by entrepreneur Josiah Briggs. For a couple of decades in the late 20th century, Norwood and its immediate neighbor to the south, Bedford Park, were major Irish enclaves after immigrants from Northern Ireland during the era of the Troubles fled the old sod and settled here in Woodlawn Heights to the north and in Queens Woodside. For a time, Norwood became known as Little Belfast and was a hotbed for supporters of the Irish Republican Army, which sought to sever Northern Ireland's ties with the United Kingdom by violent means. Eventually, the Irish influence in the area lessened, as many Irish returned home to participate in the homeland's roaring economy in the 1990s and early 2000s. St. Brendan's is a Catholic parish and boasts an imaginative piece of architecture on Perry Avenue between East 206th and East 207th. The parish was organized in 1908 and gained this church building built in the form of a ship in 1967. Why was it built in the form of a ship? According to legend, St. Brendan, who lived in the 6th century, was a sailor and navigator and journeyed to what he called the Island of the Blessed, or St. Brendan's Island, considered by some to be the Faroe Islands, Iceland, or even further west to Newfoundland, making him the first European to visit North America, centuries before the Norse made it. At this remove, anything can only be speculation. Now, here's something very obscure that you'll see on the Gun Hill Road Bridge. East Gun Hill Road, a couple of blocks east of the reservoir, crosses the Bronx River on a stone bridge marked with the letters BRPR and elsewhere on the column the date 1918. According to the late Bronx historian Bill Toomey, the letters stand for Bronx River Parkway Reservation. The reservation parallels the Bronx River from the New York Botanical Gardens north to Kensico Dam in Valhalla in Westchester County. It's a 15.5-mile swath of parkland designed in the early years of the 20th century by the Bronx Parkway Commission. Architect Charles Stoughton designed many of the buildings and other architectural elements, including this one, and the bridge also has his name inscribed on it. In January 1977, skirmishes occurred between the Patriots and the British at Fort Washington, located then where Giles Place and Sedgwick Avenue would be, and then at John Williams Bridge at Gun Hill Road and the Bronx River. The Patriots took refuge at a redoubt, a small temporary fort made of earthworks, stone, or brick, on January 25th, 1977. That was located just north of East 211th Street and west of Webster Avenue and what is now Woodlawn Cemetery. A monument to this redoubt can be seen inside the southern Woodlawn Cemetery fence north of the intersection of 211th Street and Decatur Avenue. The Patriots, commanded by Major General William Heath, fired cannon at the British here, which sent the King's forces retreating. The spot became known as the Gun Hill. By 1875, Gun Hill Road had received its name west of White Plains Road, but the Bronx east of that was mostly farmland and meadows at the time. As the Bronx became built out and newly populated, a grid system of streets was laid out, and Gun Hill Road was extended east, attaining its present length in 1938. Speaking of roadways, Mosholu Parkway is among the many Native American place names that have been woven into the city's fabric. Though when I saw it on maps as a kid, I thought it was a Japanese name. Mosholu, or Smooth Stones, was the Algonquin name of Tibbetts Brook, running through the heart of what became the Bronx's Spuyten Duyvil and Riverdale neighborhoods, since placed in underground sewers, but now the subject of a proposal to expose it again in parkland areas. In 1888, Mosholu Parkway was laid out as a true parkway, a relatively narrow carriage road lined with trees and foliage along a former waterway known to the Dutch as Schulbrook. Mosholu Parkway originally ran only between the Bronx and Van Cortlandt parks, with through traffic running in the center and local and commercial traffic on the service roads. The general concept of the parkway system, devised by master urban architect Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1860s, was to extend large parks by making the roads that connected them into parks themselves. Olmsted's vision can be seen in Brooklyn's Ocean and Eastern Parkways, and in the Bronx's Mosholu Parkway and Pelham Parkway, whose official name is the Bronx and Pelham Parkway because it connects Bronx and Pelham Bay Parks. The parkway's original stretch between the Bronx and Van Cortlandt parks is still beautifully intact. Robert Moses was rebuffed in a proposal to turn the Mosholu and Pelham parkways into expressways. Now we're going to see a little bit of Belmont. Patience and fortitude. The two marble lions guarding the New York Public Library entrance at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street were sculptured right here in the Bronx, in Mott Haven, at St. Anne's Avenue and East 142nd Street, by the Picirilli brothers, monument sculptors, whose family had migrated here from Massa, Italy in 1888, that year again. The firm also created the pediment of the New York Stock Exchange, the main memorial in Central Park, civic virtue, the so-called scandalous sculpture banished from City Hall Park to Kew Gardens, Queens, and now Greenwood Cemetery, as well as Abe Lincoln at his memorial in Washington. It's surprising that Mott Haven is not better known for the six Picirilli brothers, who were in business from 1893 to 1945 at Willis Avenue and East 142nd Street. Attilio Picirilli was the foremost artisan in the family. He executed the Daniel French portrait of Lincoln at the memorial, and he was on good terms with Enrico Caruso, Fiorello LaGuardia, and John D. Rockefeller. No less than three presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson, paid a call to the Picirilli studios. This striking Columbian memorial is on Arthur Avenue at Doria Murphy Square, D-A-U-R-I-A. It's the name for two guys, at East 183rd Street, East 184th Street. It's hard to say Bronx numbered street names. Crescent and Arthur Avenues all meet. It was moved from an earlier occasion. Yes, it was moved from PS 45 on Bathgate Avenue and Lorillard Place. That's where it was originally placed, but it was moved to the spot in 1992 in commemoration of the 500th anniversary of Columbus in the New World. Let's take a look at some interesting signage in Belmont. G Audio and Sons Bakery, 2352 Arthur Avenue, just north of East 186th Street. This is one of two locations of the venerable Bronx Little Italy Bakery. The flagship is actually a block away at Hughes Avenue and East 186th, but both locations sport this classic red and white calligraphed sign. Now, a blogger named Brooks of Sheffield of Lost City was attracted to the second audio bakery on Hughes Avenue, which also has the old school sign for the wonders displayed in the window. And this is what he said. The audio bakery is so ridiculously picturesque, it looks like a movie studio cooked it up. I don't mean the one on Arthur Avenue, but the branch one block away on Hughes Avenue. It partly draws its stark pictorial loveliness from the fact that Hughes is largely unpopulated by shops. Audio stands alone in Hopper-esque glory on a lonely corner all its own. You can gaze into the shop from two sides, or just gaze at it from across the street, as I often do when I'm in the neighborhood. The interior itself is classic and unspoiled. Ornate tile floor, shelves for bread, light fixtures, a scale or two, and little else. Many lovers of the bakery's vaunted pane de casa, advertised in wonderfully homey, hand-painted signs outside, adorn the window displays. They are crusty and magnificent, and it's a challenge to pass by and not purchase one. Now, I'm all with Brooks of Sheffield on this. If I went into more bakeries, I'd be even bigger than I am now. If audio is the measure, nearly every other store in New York is an eyesore, so says Brooks. Since I'm an infrastructure guy, I pay attention to what pizzerias look like, as well as the pizza. They are usually white with red trim and have photos of the old country on the walls, depending on what country the owner hails from. By and large, the neighborhood pizzeria experience is bland, architecturally. Better when there is a sit-down restaurant attached, but still rather generic. This leads me to Pugsley's Pizza in Fordham. I was tipped off about it by a Facebook post from Paul Lucas, whose inconspicuous consumption column I had followed avidly in the old New York press 20 years ago. Located on East 191st Street between Hoffman Street and Hughes Avenue, tucked off the south side of the street with a large front yard and a driveway, and facing the Fordham campus, it's easy to miss if you don't go to Fordham because it's off the main drag, Fordham Road. According to BronxNarratives.com, Pugsley's was founded by Sicilian immigrant Salvatore Natali in the early 1980s, a former jazz saxophonist who had arrived in the States in 1967. It was originally located on Pugsley Avenue in Castle Hill. In 1985, Natali purchased what had been a junkyard on East 191st and opened the current shop there. It was an almost immediate hit with the Fordham students and locals. As for the Pugsley's Pizza itself, in my opinion, it's top drawer. Pugsley's pies seem a bit larger than other pizzeria pies, so 2 slices will leave you feeling a little fuller than you would be otherwise. Now, for years, I had thought Pugsley Avenue, Creek, and Pizza had nothing to do with Pugsley Addams, the cherubic, good-natured, striped-shirted scion of the Addams family, played by the late Ken Weatherwax in the 60s TV show. But I was wrong. When cartoonist Charles Addams, who helped develop the show, was looking for appropriate names for the characters, he happened on a Bronx map, saw the name, and made up his mind right then and there. Tracy Towers refers to the 2 twin buildings designed by architect Paul Rudolph, located in the Jerome Park neighborhood. The towers became the tallest in the borough when completed in 1972 at 400 feet or 120 meters tall. Although the 404 feet tall River Park Towers to the south took the title just 3 years later. Tracy Towers consists of 9 windowless concrete tubes built with grooved blocks and without any setbacks. These blocks create asterisks, which are divided by white slabs relative to each floor. Unlike most buildings in the city, the windows and balconies are placed in between the gaps formed by the concrete tubes. These tubes are also designed to spiral around a central keystone-like structure on a square-shaped plot. This design was chosen in order to align with Rudolph's vision for a futuristic obelisk. Tracy Towers is known for its robust representation of Ghanaian Americans new to the country or second and third generation. Their ample presence, complete with their own tennis association and yearly events highlighting the colorful culture of the West African country, has earned it a cute name among residents. Little Ghana. You may think the engineer of the Grand Concourse would be remembered by more than a very short street connecting the Grand Concourse and Mosholu Parkway. The Grand Concourse runs up the western end of the Bronx like a zipper. Unzip it, and you will find Bronx past, present, and future. The grand visions of a suburban borough for the wealthy that turned into a gritty urban superhighway from Yankee Stadium to Van Cortlandt Park. Forgotten New York covered the concourse from the beginning, and the second Forgotten New York tour took place here on July 18, 1999. It was one of the craziest tours Forgotten New York ever ran. We were helping author Stuart Miller research the version of the Blue Guide to New York that would come out the next year. And eventually we split into two separate parties. My end of the schism ran into a thunder shower and a parade, the Dominican Day Parade, at the same time on the concourse. And somehow we finished up north in Norwood in a bar on Bainbridge Avenue while we watched the Yankees' David Cone finish a perfect game on the bar television. To top it off, it was the hottest day of the summer at 98 degrees. 11 lanes wide from 161st Street north to Mosholu, the Grand Boulevard and Concourse, shortened to Grand Concourse for the benefit of sign makers and cabbies, was built from 161st Street north in 1909 by engineer Louis Reese. In 1927, it absorbed Mott Avenue, which ran from 138th Street north to 161st, and the older street was widened. The concourse became the Bronx's showpiece as the Bronx County Courthouse, Yankee Stadium, and an array of elegant apartment buildings were constructed along its length. The concourse and surrounding streets are a wonder world of magnificent apartment architecture. Most of the grand apartments were built from 1925 to 1940. The dominant style is Art Moderne, a streamland style offshoot from Art Deco. In that era, most of the concourse residents were Eastern European and Jewish. But in the late 1960s and early 1970s, demographics changed as Co-op City near the Westchester County line was built, and the overall rush to suburbia spurred a move out of the city. Today, the concourse is home to a Latino and Caribbean American population, and the architecture is seemingly eternal. Louis Reese first envisioned the concourse in the 1870s when he was in his 20s. He lived to see a scaled-down version of the road become a reality. In the 1870s, the automobile was still science fiction, and Reese's vision encompassed horse-drawn carriages pleasantly clomping up and down tree-lined, shady express route, much like Olmsted and Vaux's original plans for Ocean and Eastern Parkways in Brooklyn. Detailed plans were drawn up in 1892 with the aid of Louis J. Heinz, who died at age 31 and did not see the plans realized, and Louis F. Haffen, who, after succeeding Heinz as Commissioner of Street Improvements, oversaw the concourse's construction from 1902 to 1909 as borough president. DeWitt Clinton High School is housed in a magnificent neoclassic campus built in 1929 at the northeast end of Jerome Park Reservoir, where Goulden Avenue, Sedgwick Avenue, and Mosholu Parkway come together. The school was dedicated October 29, 1929, Black Friday, when the stock market crashed. This is actually the school's third building. It was founded as Boys High in Greenwich Village in 1896, moved to 10th Avenue and West 59th Street in Hell's Kitchen in 1906, and then to the Bronx 23 years later. It was the last gender-segregated public high school in New York City until 1983, when girls were accepted. At one point in the 1960s, 12,000 students were enrolled, making it the largest high school in the world. At present, over 4,000 attend. The alumni include Ralph Lauren, James Baldwin, Marvel Comics Stan Lee, Richard Rodgers, the writer of 42 Broadway scores, including Oklahoma, basketball's Nate Archibald, Tiny Archibald, Richard Condon, writer of the Manchurian Candidate, Seymour Berger, creator of the modern baseball card, and Tracy Morgan of Saturday Night Live, among many other writers, athletes, directors, chief executives, and government officials. I've not been able to amass any information on what appears to be the 1930s machine age style gatehouses found on West 205th and Goulden and Sedgwick and Goulden. They were built a couple of decades after Jerome Park Reservoir opened in 1906 from the looks of things. The exterior of the reservoir is severely fenced off, as it has been since the 1950s or so. The Jerome Park Reservoir was built in 1906 and designed by Benjamin Church to serve the Croton Aqueduct system and holds 773 million gallons of water at capacity. The old Croton Aqueduct actually runs under Goulden Avenue, its eastern border, and its stones are visible in the reservoir wall from the avenue. It was constructed on the former Jerome Park racetrack, built by financier Leonard Jerome, grandfather of Winston Churchill, later owned by August Belmont, who financed the original IRT subway. The Amalgamated Houses were the first union-sponsored housing cooperative in the United States, sponsored by the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, under the leadership of Sidney Hillman, for whom Noble Avenue was renamed in 1950, and created by Abraham E. Kazan, the founder of cooperative housing in the USA. The first buildings between Sedgwick Avenue and Van Cortlandt Park South went under construction in 1927. The latest additions were completed in 1970. The structures were built inexpensively and with no frills, but they produced an attractive and comfortable environment for families and community interaction. Similar to housing projects of today, there were a series of interconnecting high-rise buildings organized around communal public space. But back then, the developer and the architect made an effort when it came to design. The public spaces were green spaces with paths, shaped gardens, and fountains. The buildings were designed in a Tudor style with large windows. The Sholem Aleichem Cooperative. The houses are a remnant of a period prior to a time when full knowledge of the butcheries of Joseph Stalin had become fully known, and the totalitarian governments that had featured socialism were duly reviled, when socialism and communism were considered viable alternatives to the purely capitalist system espoused in the USA. Amalgamated is one of 3 housing cooperatives in the northern Bronx created in the 1920s, along with the Sholem Aleichem Cooperative on Giles Place and the United Workers Cooperative Colony on Allerton Avenue near Bronx Park, which stood displays the hammer and sickle symbol over some of its doorways. The Sholem Aleichem Cooperative was built in the same era as the amalgamated houses by labor unions and progressive Jewish organizations. In Hebrew, Sholem Aleichem means peace be upon you, and is the title of a song sung at the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. But these houses' name refers to the people's storyteller, Shalom Rabinowitz, 1859 to 1916, who did much to promote the use of the Yiddish language in literature. He adopted Sholem Aleichem as his pen name. The late Bronx historian John McNamara related a Giles Place story in his book, McNamara's Old Bronx. In 1915, some neighborhood boys were playing war, digging trenches on Giles Place using borrowed picks and trowels. They hit something hard under the soil and found several cannonballs. It turned out they were left over from Fort Independence and were subsequently distributed to the New York Historical Society, as well as Dyckman House in Inwood and the Van Cortlandt Mansion Museum in Van Cortlandt Park. The Parks Department soon founded Fort Independence Park along Sedgwick Avenue, between Sedgwick Avenue and the reservoir. This is a style of architecture I run into frequently in the Bronx. I call it the Bronx curve. Dozens of apartment buildings in the Bronx have curved edges. When Bronx streets were laid out in the street and house numbering system was continued from Manhattan Island. Manhattan and Bronx were once the same county, but the Bronx was much hillier, and some streets were built on curves and slants. Now they tried to superimpose a grid system over these curves and slants and hills in the Bronx, but it didn't really work out because several streets had to be built on an angle and had to be built on curves. Thus, some of the buildings on these irregular corners were built in a curve fashion, and which allowed a full sweep of 180 degrees. If you're in the right window of looking out the window, you could see a full 180 degree sweep of what was across the street. It was a very innovative design, and a lot of architects must have picked up from the other on this, because this style, this feature is found all over the Bronx on many buildings laid out and designed by different architects. So they all settled on this same conclusion, the Bronx curve. Here we see another example of the Bronx curve at Hughes Avenue and 100 and, whoops, sorry about that, folks. Let me go back. There we go. Hit the wrong button. You never know when you're going to hit the wrong button. Anyway, this is another example of the Bronx curve at 182nd Street and Hughes Avenue. And that one is very severe because the west end meets a sharp cutoff. But the curved, you can see the curved edge at the corner of Hughes and 182nd Street. So here's what I call the Kingsbridge Castle. The lots of 2744 Kingsbridge Terrace and neighboring 2748 Kingsbridge Terrace were owned in the early 20th century by German immigrant, piano factory superintendent Frederick Schill. In 1911, Schill filed plans for a 3-story stone house with a tile roof to be built on Kingsbridge Terrace at an estimated cost of $10,000 in 1911, that was real money, to plans by Rudolf F. Knockenhauer. And it's likely he developed it as a Bavarian-style mini-castle. It made an appearance in the 1979 film The Wanderers and was on sale in 2022 for about $1.5 billion. And I think $1.5 billion for this building would be a bargain, even in 2024 money. The Kingsbridge Armory, believe it or not, was at one time considered a prime New York City tourist attraction. on West Kingsbridge Road between Jerome and Reservoir Avenues. In its heyday in the 1940s and 1950s, it was home to bicycle races and boat shows. The armory was built from 1912 to 1917 by architectural firm Pilcher and Tuckow as a munitions storage area. When built, it was supposedly the largest armory in the world. The interior dirt drill deck measured 300 by 600 feet. The armory housed the 258th Field Artillery. The unit has its roots as a military escort for George Washington at his first inauguration. It is the largest of New York City's remaining armories, and at one time was the largest armory in the world. Now, when I passed this building a few weeks ago on Kingsbridge Terrace, it was unfortunately covered from head to toe in scaffolding. So I have plenty of pictures of it. I used a photo from a few winters ago that when I visited, I think it was 2019, hence you can see the snow on the ground. Anyway, this is the beautiful 50th the Boarts building, the 50th New York City Police Precinct building. It was completed in 1902 by architects Arthur Horgan and Vincent Slattery. Note the inscription above the door. 50th seems to have been added later, and indeed it was because this was originally called the 40th Precinct building. As a 1923 atlas shows, it has also been the 57th Precinct. Since 1976, it has been home to the Kingsbridge Heights Community Center. It was made a New York City landmark in 1986. Kingsbridge Terrace rides atop a crest, looking down on the Kingsbridge and Riverdale neighborhoods, and many of the hills are too steep for the horses and carts in use when the streets were laid out. Summit Place is one of the step streets built to enable travel up and down the crest. Note the antique lamppost on the wall. Some of these step streets, and the Bronx has perhaps hundreds of them, also are home to ancient lamppost stylings that are otherwise not found in the city. Dr. George Schrady, editor of the New York Medical Record, took possession of 12 acres of land in what is now Kingsbridge in 1860. Dr. Schrady, who later served in the Civil War, was from a long line of career soldiers, as his grandfather and father had served in the Revolutionary War and War of 1812, respectively. Family was originally German and bore the name Schrader. Today, Schrady Place is a quiet, obscure dead end on Kingsbridge Terrace near the Jerome Park Reservoir. Now, we talked about the Boston Post Road earlier. Here's a remnant of the lesser-known Albany Post Road. Albany Crescent describes about a 180-degree circle from Kingsbridge Terrace west, north, and northeast to Bailey Avenue and West 233rd atop the Major Deegan Expressway. In colonial times, this was a junction between the Albany Post Road and the Boston Post Road, which continued on to their respective cities. In the Bronx, Van Cortlandt Avenue East and Boston Road northeast of Bronx Park overlay the path of the old Boston Post Road, while the Albany Post Road is a little bit harder to find. Albany Crescent is part of it, and a little bit of it can also be seen west of Broadway from West 251st and 252nd Streets in Riverdale, and a lengthy 6.5-mile stretch is preserved in Phillipstown in upstate Putnam County. I never fail to take a picture of this beautiful building when I pass it by whenever I'm in the Kingsbridge area. The turreted building at West 231st and 3072 Bailey Avenue was constructed according to real estate records in 1915, but it looks older than that. It's one of my favorites in the neighborhood because of its corner turret and cupola. It's one of my favorites in the neighborhood. I know nothing more about it. It recently underwent a restoration, but since the building is not landmarked, I cannot glean a whole lot of information in records or online. But I love the porch treatment. Look at all that. Look at all that detail on the porch, and of course the cupola on the right. Beautiful building. Nearby, you can see a red brick street, West 230th. According to John McNamara, writing in History and Asphalt, West 230th Street in Kingsbridge Heights and Riverdale has had an active history. It once led to an island, Hummock Island. The Native American name Paparinaman was part of the estate of Alexander Macomb, scion of a milling family who operated a dam bridge across the Harlem River. The current Macomb's Dam Bridge was named for it. Hummock was a small island defined by Spuyten Creek, landfilled in 1916. In the Revolutionary War, Patriots built a fort south of where the street would be that was captured by the British during their New York City occupation between 1776 and 1783. The red brick section of West 230th runs from Heath Avenue west to Bailey Avenue. Further west, it crosses the Major Deegan Expressway, where there is an entrance and an exit, to Irwin Avenue, where it then rises along one of New York City's lengthiest step streets to Neverland Avenue. The white bricks in the center indicate that West 230th used to be two-way, but these days it is one-way east. There are very few red brick streets left in New York City. Among the other ones are Bennett Court in Bay Ridge and part of 89th Avenue in Jamaica. And that's about all I can think of. There may be one or two more of them, but that's about all. And whenever I see unusual street paving, I, of course, get all over it with my camera. On West 230th, you will see this building. The Cassian Benevolent Society of America, Bailey Avenue and West 230th. Kassos is the southernmost Greek island, positioned between just west of Carpathos in the southern Aegean Sea. The island of Crete is several miles to the west. The color scheme of its brick building matches the bricks in the street. I walked this area just last summer. I think it was June. And I got this beautiful shot on West 193rd Street and Kingsbridge Terrace. We're looking down toward Bailey Avenue. It's a very sharp uphill and downhill, depending on which way you're going. And you can see the contrast between the step and repeat attached brick houses and the Broadway Bridge. This version of the Broadway Bridge was completed in 1962. As you may expect, it takes Broadway over the Harlem River. Many of the old Croton Aqueduct's New York City remnants are visible in the Bronx and even in Upper Manhattan, as are some reminders of the new Croton Aqueduct. I keep saying architect when I want to say aqueduct. It's just a tick I have. Anyway, at various points along the aqueduct, just kidding, above ground structures known as gatehouses were constructed. Under the gatehouses could be found machinery that assisted in routing and directing the flow of water. In Manhattan, there are remaining gatehouses at West 113th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, built in 1876, now a daycare center for the elderly population. There's also one at West 119th Street and Amsterdam, now a city landmark, and the largest Manhattan gatehouse at Convent Avenue and West 135th Street, which has been refurbished for use as a theater by City College. In the Bronx, the old Croton Aqueduct's length has been carefully marked and designated. Much of the old Croton's path is now a walking trail in Van Cortlandt Park, continuing into Westchester County, north of the park, for fully 26 miles to Old Croton Aqueduct State Historic Park. 3 old Croton gatehouses can be seen along the Jerome Park Reservoir at Golden and Reservoir Avenues, Golden Avenue and West 205th Street, and Golden Avenue and Sedgwick. The beautiful Christ Church, an Episcopal church, can be found at Henry Hudson Parkway and West 252nd Street in Riverdale. We're going to touch on a few Riverdale items. Like I said before, I could spend an hour and a half on Riverdale alone, but we'll just do a couple of items. Christ Church, it's a country chapel, was constructed by renowned ecclesiastical architect Richard Upjohn in a rural Gothic style in 1866. The church and its next door parsonage are largely as they were when built. They appear largely as they were when they were first constructed. The chancel windows were constructed by British architect William Wailes, Wailes. Upjohn's masterwork in New York City, of course, is Broadway's Trinity Church, constructed in 1846. Other Upjohn churches in New York City, such as St. Saviour's and Maspeth, have not fared as well through time. Brothers George and William Hadley built the center section of this 2-story colonial on Post Road, just north of West 251st Street in the mid-1700s, making it just a little younger than the Van Cortlandt mansion itself. In 1777, the Hadleys used the house as a garrison for a corps of volunteers serving the Patriots' cause. In 1829, it became the property of Major Delafield, along with much of the rest of Riverdale and Fieldston. In 1915, Dwight James Baum, who had a hand in so many of Riverdale's architecture, remodeled the Hadley House, adding wings to the north and south. Baum was careful to maintain the house's original features. And you can see the original part of the house is the center section. If you count the windows from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th and 5th windows from the left are part of the original building. The other 2 wings were built by Dwight James Baum in 1915. Walk west on West 246th Street from Waldo Avenue, and then turn north on Livingston Avenue, which is marked by a dead-end sign. Don't mind the sign, just ascend the hill. You'll be treated to a small lake surrounded by a dirt walkway and benches. It's not on any map and is one of Riverdale's best-kept secrets. Locals call it Indian Pond because it is behind Indian Road on its west. Finally in the Bronx, although this is not the end of our tour today, but finally in the Bronx, I'm showing the University Heights Bridge. Alfred Pancoast Baller was a civil engineer and bridge designer. He was the chief engineer on several bridge building projects during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Born in Philadelphia, Baller graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. He co-founded an engineering company, Baller and Hodge, that was based in New York City. Baller designed the 3rd Market Street Bridge in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. and then most of the Harlem River bridges and the Connecticut River Bridge in Connecticut, of course. He was also the chief engineer of Manhattan's elevated railroads. From the late 1800s into the 1940s, the elevated was Manhattan's aorta, bringing human traffic along 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 9th Avenues to workplaces and businesses nearly the length of the borough, until the LaGuardia era, when the independent subway was built and L's became inaesthetic and were then ripped down. The University Heights Bridge is named for the Bronx neighborhood at its eastern end and runs from West 207th in Inwood to Fordham Road. As such, it is a direct connector to Pelham Parkway, Pelham Bay Park, and the Hutchinson River Parkway. It was not built in the place it originally occupied. At first, it brought traffic over the Harlem River Ship Canal, connecting the Broadways of Manhattan and the Bronx. In the early part of the 1900s, it was decided to build a double-deck swing span over Broadway to accommodate the new elevated. And so the old Broadway Bridge was floated down the Harlem River to its current location in 1906. The newly christened University Heights Bridge replaced a wood footbridge that had been in place since 1881 and removed in 1895, when the ship canal made the Harlem River navigable all the way to the Hudson River. After additional steel and electric work, the bridge reopened in 1908. And in this bridge, you can see several details that were added to bridges back then you don't see anymore. There was probably some seating underneath that sunshade-like structure on the left. And then you see in the background on the right what was probably a gatehouse to collect tolls. It's likely the bridge was likely tolled when first constructed, and now it's toll-free. But the gatehouse, those gatehouses are still there, as well as the places you could actually take a rest in the shade on a sunny, hot day like was when I shot the picture. Anyway, that's the end of the Bronx. However, we're not done, because from here on out, I'm going to show you some images from the early days of Forgotten New York, 1999 to 2000. So buckle your seatbelts, and here we go. This painted ad can be seen in Brooklyn Heights on Middah Street, Middah, Middah Street, west of Cabin Plaza. It advertises a real estate office that was found on Nostrand Avenue and Fulton Street. Now, it uses language that we no longer use. To let, of course, means for rent. Flats were apartments. So, in 2024 terms, that means that the James Ross Company was advertising rental apartments. And that the paint for that sign, it goes back probably 120 years, 125 years or more. The paint was of exceptionally high quality because the sunshine is beating down on it for at least half the day, and yet it's still very readable. These variety of stoplights once controlled traffic on most New York City street corners between 1930 or so and 1985, when virtually all of them were removed. And they were replaced by the much larger guy-wired stoplights that you see today, or by contrast, the smaller ones are cylindrical and are made of aluminum. But this style was, with its detail at the base and the olive paint job, were all removed around by 1985. Most were gone. A few were still to be found in Central Park, and that's where I got this picture about 10 to 12 years ago. Even these, the remaining ones in Central Park, have been removed. Between 1964 and about 1984, New York City street signs had a color code. Now, if you're old enough, you'll remember this. In the Bronx, the street signs were blue with white lettering. In Staten Island and Manhattan, I don't know why they did the same color scheme for both, but they were both yellow with black lettering. In Queens was the reverse of the Bronx. The Queens street signs were white with blue lettering, and Brooklyn was black with white lettering. I thought this was a great system because you can always tell what borough you're in. But in the 1980s, I believe a federal order or a federal regulation was arrived at that said that most street signs, except those in landmarked or business district areas, had to be green with white lettering, and that's what all of New York signs were converted to. But when I started out with Forgotten New York, there was still quite a number of the older signs still around. And this was at Chicago Atlantis in an area of Staten Island called Arrowcar. My friend Robert Malero, I don't know if Robert is here today, but Robert Malero is the king of New York City lampposts. He has taken thousands of pictures of New York City lampposts beginning in 1978 and continuing until the present day. Well, he also photographed alleyways. This is what Extra Place in Manhattan looked like in 1978. Extra Place is a dead end on East First Street, east of the Bowery. One of the doorways on the left side of the picture was the back door of CBGB's, the Rock and Roll Club. And there is a picture, and I don't have it with me. If I had had it with me, I would have put it on the PowerPoint. There is a picture of the Ramones shot in Extra Place, and it looked much like it does here. Complete wreckage. Here's what it looks like now. Oh, I guess I didn't put it there. Maybe it's out of place and I'll get to it later. Anyway, it's been completely renovated and now looks nothing like that. The building on the left is still there, but it's been repointed, rehabbed, and it's up to date. And the buildings on the right are long gone. That the house at the end of the alleyway on 2nd Street has also disappeared. The large building in the back was once a Salvation Army building. I believe it was once also YMCA building. But on the right you can now find the Avalon Apartments, which were built maybe 15 years ago. So it's a brand new building. Anyway, the alley is completely cleaned up and no longer looks like that anymore. The PATH train, if I don't know how many people in the Bronx make much use of the PATH train. It connects Newark, Hoboken, and Jersey City with Manhattan, Greenwich Village, and then running up 6th Avenue to 33rd Street. And it was built in 1908, and it was among, in 1908, that made it among New York's first original subways. The original subway, IRT, was built in 1904. So when the H&M, the PATH, was built in 1908, it took its place as one of the oldest subway lines in New York, and it's still in operation between 33rd Street and Newark. The H&M stands for Hudson and Manhattan Railroad. This tiled sign appears in the 14th Street station. There are a couple of antique tiled signs that still point the way to the PATH train, which runs side by side with the 6th Avenue IND line down 6th Avenue. However, since they're owned, since H&M is, since PATH is owned by the Port Authority, you cannot transfer between the two, between the IND, the subway, and the PATH train. Of course, if you're fare beating, as so many people do today, I guess it doesn't matter. But anyway, Ichabod Crane. Now, you remember The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, the scrawny school teacher, Ichabod Crane? Well, Washington Irving actually knew an Ichabod Crane. He was an Army colonel of his acquaintance who lived in Staten Island. And up until recently, Ichabod Crane's house still stood on Wentworth Avenue in the Greenridge section of Staten Island. And his gravesite can be found in the Asbury Church churchyard. It's now called the Sun Arise Church, and the churchyard is on Richmond Avenue, just south of Victory Boulevard. And this was the original Ichabod Crane tombstone. Fortunately, and you can see the local youth had set to work with their usual scrawling. Fortunately, the Ichabod Crane gravesite was given a brand new marker about 15 years ago, and so far the Sun Arise Church has been able to maintain it, and it's still in great shape. But this is what it originally looked like. You can barely make out the name Ichabod Crane at the very top of the marker. Originally had a shaft at the top. That fell off many years ago. The new marker does have the shaft, so if you're in the area, stop in and pay a visit to Ichabod Crane. New York City. Whoops, here I go again. Okay. New York City streets were once lit by gaslights, and they were lit manually. A lamplighter had to come around at dawn and put the light out, and at dusk put the light on. Well, every iron pole that supported the gas lights have disappeared over the decades, except for two. One can be found on Broadway and 211th Street in Inwood. The other is at the end of Patchen Place in Greenwich Village. Now, the Patchen Place one has been given an electric light at its apex. However, this one is still there, and it's not landmark. I'm not sure if it's landmarked or not. Maybe Bob could fill me in on that a little later. But it's still there. It's still there on the corner. It's subject to being attacked by trucks, but it's still there. I have a photo from the 1940s in which there are two street signs affixed to the top of it, but I'm fairly sure that it was once used as a gas lamp because it has the same base. The design of the base is the same as other pictures of gas lamps that I've seen around town. So this is a true artifact of the gas lamp era in New York City. Before New York City or the Department of Transportation put up large green rectangular signs to point the way to parkways and expressways, they depended on these very small signs that were affixed to lampposts and telephone poles. These were found on Junction Boulevard and 46th Avenue in Corona, and they pointed the way to the Bronx Whitestone Bridge and the Triborough Bridge. Now, we've seen the color coding of old street signs in New York City. Well, these parkway and expressway signs also had a color code and a shape code after a fashion. The signs that pointed the way to bridges were either arrowhead shaped or triangular, and they were all in combinations of red, white, and blue. The signs that pointed the way to tunnels were circular and had black lettering on either a white or yellow field. You can, if you notice these things like I do when I'm walking around, you can still see a couple of those tunnel signs around town. I don't think any, I think in the Bronx itself, there are a couple of these arrowhead triangle signs left. I think I saw one on River Avenue a few years ago. I don't know if it's still there though. I'll have to check. So this is one of the oldest buildings in Staten Island at the south end of Highland Boulevard. Now, Highland Boulevard is the longest street in Staten Island. It was named for Mayor John Highland because the roadway was completed shortly after his mayoralty. He was succeeded by Jimmy Walker. So he was mayor in the 1910s, early 20s. And at the north end of Highland Boulevard, you'll find the Alice Austin House. Alice Austin was a famous photographer of New York City and Staten Island in the early part of the 20th century. And her family lived in a house that was built in the 1600s. Of course, it had a lot of additions made to it, but the house is still there and you can visit it. It's now a museum. At the south end is another building from the 1600s. It's a colonial era building built by the Billop family. And this was the site of a conference that took place between American or Patriots representatives and British General Howe in 1776. Now, they were trying to work out an end to the Revolutionary War. The Patriots, led by Benjamin Franklin, talked to General Howe, and one of General Howe's demands to end the war was that the United States give up all thoughts of independence and rejoin the British Empire. However, Benjamin Franklin, that was a non-starter. And the war continued on in New York for 7 more years. But the conference took place in this building. We've visited it on a couple of Forgotten New York tours, and it's maintained on the inside as it was in the 1700s. It's a beautiful building. Both the Austin House and this building are museums. They're open to the public, and I recommend visiting both of them. This is a painted ad found at Duffy Square in Manhattan, Broadway and 47th Street. A building on the corner was torn down in 1998, revealing this sign: for J.A. Keel's Carriage Manufactory and Repairing. Now, before Times Square was the center of the entertainment world in New York City, it was the center of the horse and carriage market and was known as Longacre Square. It was named for the square in London, Longacre Square, which was also the home of the horse and carriage industry. Both the horses and the carriages were available for sale. After the New York Times moved its building to Times Square in 1904, the area gradually became home to entertainment, became one of New York's premier entertainment and theater districts, and the horses and carriages moved out. But in around 1880, when this sign was painted, Longacre Square was still the center of the horse and carriage industry. Now, this ad was visible only for a few months in 1998. After that, a new building went up on the corner. But, you never know. In 100 years or 120 years, when that building comes down, this ad will once again be visible to fascinate people who live in that era 120 years from now. You never know. And this was one of the things that got me started on Forgotten New York, just seeing this. I wanted to chronicle aspects of New York City that don't get in the guidebooks or are otherwise unnoticed. And this is one of the culprits. This is one of the things that got me thinking about it. As was this. Now, my pal Frank Junk operates a website called Faded Ads. If you do a Google search for Faded Ads, you'll find it. And he had done a marvelous job of locating and photographing ancient painted ads from the 1850s up until the present, well, not the present day, but for 100-year span, at least between 1850 and 1950. And one of them was this brilliant blue ad for Reckitt's Blue, which was a cleaning powder. We call it detergent nowadays. And it was marketed in a blue container. And so the ad was painted in a incredibly brilliant blue color. Now, the reason it didn't fade was that it was behind the building on Washington Avenue and Dean Street in Prospect Heights, which is actually close to where I went to high school. But there was a building in front of it, so I never saw it. Then, of course, the building came down, the ad became visible, and within a year or so, it had vanished again because the building was built in its place. So that ad is preserved. Whenever that building comes down, 100 years from now, 150 years from now, you'll be able to see that ad once again. Slot mailboxes were affixed to telephone poles and lampposts throughout much of the 20th century, especially in the early years of the 20th century, when, in the 30s and 40s, they started to be replaced by the familiar drum freestanding mailboxes that you see on street corners now. However, these small mailboxes were suitable only for letters. You couldn't even fit a large manila envelope into those. And because of, for various reasons, the drum mailboxes, the big ones, have begun putting slots back. You can't even fit a manila envelope into the small slots that are now at these big drum mailboxes. So I see no reason why we can't go back to using these small little slot mailboxes that used to be all over the place. By the time I started doing Forgotten New York in 1999, I would think there were about 6 or 7 of these remaining. This was on Richmond Valley Road and Marsden Avenue, way, way down in Richmond Valley at the southern end of Staten Island. And it was gone within a year after I got this picture. The Rockaway branch of a Long Island Railroad ran from the main line in Rego Park all the way south to the Rockaway Peninsula. It closed in 1962. The right-of-way has been empty since 1962. It is overgrown with weeds and trees, and you can still see, though, that there are some remnants of the tracks still remaining. And you can see that at the lower right corner of the picture. Anyway, in 2000, I joined a group of intrepid urban explorers and walked the length of the Rockaway line from Rego Park all the way down into Woodhaven. And on the left, you see the urban photographer and maritime photographer, the late Bernard Ante. To his right in the jacket is Mark Wolodarski, who is still a subway historian. And on the right is my friend Vincent Locido, whom I've known since 1985 and who has accompanied me on many of my excursions. Before Queen Streets were numbered, they were named. 65th Street in Jackson Heights and Woodside was once called Rowan Street. Now, when the IND subway was built in the 1930s, 65th Street, Rowan Street had already been renamed as 65th Street. But what the IND and the BMT also did for area old timers who might get confused by the numbers, they often included the old names in the signage. However, you're going to laugh at this, but there is also a couple of brand new black and white signs at this station that say Rowan Street on it. Obviously, the people in the sign shop aren't historians, and they don't know that the name Rowan Street hasn't been used for over 75 years. So they just followed it out the window, and they just replicated the tiled sign that you see here on the new black and white sign. It's an anomaly. I'm glad it's there. This lamppost, my pal Bob Malero is the king of New York City lampposts. I am maybe the prince, because I have been interested in lampposts since they were all replaced on my block in 1962, from cast irons that you see here to the new streamlined version. This one, I got this shot in 1988, long before I was doing Forgotten New York at all. And but even back then, I enjoyed walking around in Riverdale. And I was on Mosholu Avenue and Post Avenue, just off Broadway, when lo and behold, this ancient Type G, all the lampposts, all the older cast iron lampposts had letters from A to G. And this is a Type G. And, I won't belabor you with how I know, but it was still there, and it was unpainted, and the city hadn't painted it in years. And finally, rather than paint it and maintain it, they decided to take it away and put a brand new modern type lamppost in its place. It's a shame. There are a couple of I was just in Stuyvesant Town on Saturday, and if you want to see New York City's last big collection of Type G lampposts like this, walk around in Stuyvesant Town. You'll see plenty of them there. This was on a fan trip I took for the Long Island Railroad. This is the Port Washington branch, and these MP75 cars were rarely to be seen on the line. Why? Because they were not electrified. They were pulled by diesel engines at the front and the back. But since this was a fan trip and we were going all over Long Island, at least all over Nassau County, I was able to get this shot at Corona Yards. I was on the train, but they did liberal stops here and there, and they spent like 10 or 15 minutes at each station. And this is at the Flushing Meadows Mets Willets Point station, and I got a great shot of the MP75 cars as well in the Corona Yards of all these Redbird R33 and R36 cars in Corona Yards. Back in 1999, the Flushing line, the 7 train, was still completely populated by these cars. By the way, an interesting thing about the MP75s, and I've heard this borne out by other Long Island Railroad people, is that the bathrooms in the cars opened directly onto the tracks. So you can imagine what kind of shape the tracks were on some of the lines used by the MP75 cars. That I won't belabor you any further with that. So we're going to wrap it up. We started at 7, and here we are, 8:36. We're going to wrap it up. One of my favorite pictures that I took in recent years, this was in 2008, when I led a tour. We met at the Manhattan Bridge Plaza at Canal Street, and we walked the Manhattan Bridge, and then we went into Brooklyn and we walked back across the Brooklyn Bridge. And of course, I had plenty of information about both bridges, and we also saw several scenes in Brooklyn between the bridges. And at the end of the tour, I met a couple of cousins, and we went into the Patriot on Chambers Street, and we drank for 5 hours. And then we had to go to a party out in Long Island. But we made it, and it was a great day. The Patriot, of course, is no longer open. But on a busy day, you might be able to get a shot similar to this. So I'm going to wrap it up right now. I'm going to bring Dr. Payne back in, and I'll take any questions you may have, or any comments you may have, or any complaints you may have. But take it away, Dr. Payne.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much for incredibly rich and informative presentation. There's definitely some questions that I'll read to you that people already put in during the chat, but I encourage others. You'll have maybe 10, 15 minutes of Q&A as long as the questions are flowing. So I encourage other people to either put your questions in the chat or comments in the chat, or if you're so brave as to ask a question live, just raise your hand and I'll give you permission to speak. And Kevin, I'm just gonna take the hosting back so I can do that. Okay, great. Okay, so let's start with some of the Q&A here. Okay, so first, this is more a practical question, Kevin, and I think I can probably answer it, but this is from Nancy Romano. This presentation is amazing. I would love to share with family and friends. Is there any way they can access this in the future? So with Kevin's permission, we'll be sharing this recording to folks who registered. Kevin, do you mind if they share it with family and friends?
Not at all, because I know of a couple of people that couldn't make it today, and they would love to be able to look at it.
Great, great. So stay tuned, Nancy. Should be in the next couple days. I'll send out a link to everyone who registered, then you can share that with any family and friends. Let me see. Evie Mayer, chat is disabled, it says. That's probably a setting that has to be set before, but Q&A, you can go ahead and add things into Q&A, Evie. So let me just answer that question. Okay. Do a couple more from the Q&A box before there's a couple people with their hands raised as well. This is from Bill Kinsella. Not a question, Kevin. Just a note of thanks for this fascinating talk and your wonderful picture, the treasure trove of Bronx and New York history.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Here is a question from Francie. Who was the jazz musician to whom you referred? The
Which
owner of Pugsley's, I think.
let me return to my notes.
Salvatore, I think his name is.
Salvatore Natale,
And
Natale.
and Kevin, I don't know when the last time you went to Pugsley's was, but
Yeah,
when you've been,
it's been a few years. So is it closed?
no, as
Uh,
far as I know, it's still open. It's been a couple years for me, but the last few times I went, I probably went pretty religiously in, I don't know, say 2016, 17, 18. He would regularly bring a saxophone out. I don't know if he did that when you went, but
no, I was
um,
there on a winter afternoon during the week, so I don't think I was
okay,
there.
okay. But yeah, in the middle of putting sauce on dough, he'd bring a saxophone out and and plays. He's a real character.
Well, I
Um,
intend to get back up there sometime soon. The, the
okay,
the problem is we had a tour up there on a June afternoon. We're touring the Bronx June afternoon. You would think they would be open. No, because school was out. So they
yep,
don't open they close a lot when school is out.
that's right. That's right. I think he might even he might even go to Italy for, some period of time in the summer. I just forget off the top of my head, but definitely worth checking out. Um, let's see. Oh wow, okay. So there's a growing list of questions. We'll just do a couple more, and then I'll give permission to folks to ask questions live as well. Um, this might be a little bit of a hard one, Kevin, at least off the top of your head. This is from George Torres Jr. What happened to John's on Kingsbridge, the ice cream confectionery kind of shop? Do you happen
Well,
to know?
most of the John's locations have now closed. There's one remaining in Jackson Heights on, I believe it's 35th Avenue or 37th Avenue. I'm not sure which, but most of the John's locations have now closed. Why does anything close? Business was not great. So, you know,
Okay, let's see. Here's an interesting one from Thomas Casey, who we're always honored to have at our events. Definitely a Bronx historian. Yellow Brick Road, Dorothea Place in the Bronx. Have you been there?
yeah, it's on Marion, just off of Fordham.
And the bricks are yellow. I don't think
With
I've
Yellow
been
Brick
there.
Road. There's another Yellow Brick Road in New York City on Stockholm Street in Ridgewood. So that those are the two yellow brick roads. So there's a few red brick roads and there are a couple of yellow brick roads.
Okay, let
And
me see.
another thing unusual about Dorothea Place is that it's T-shaped. If you walk up Dorothea Place, you'll see that it juts out at the end. So it's the street is literally shaped like a T.
Uh-huh. Very interesting. Okay, let's get some live questions here. Let's see. Andrew Sparberg, I think you also uh
Andy's always correcting me.
okay. And I think Andy put something in Q&A. So Andy, I'm gonna give you permission to talk. You can go ahead and kill multiple birds with one stone.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Fire away.
Kevin. I don't always correct you. You sometimes correct me, so let's give credit where credit is due. Thank you. But anyway, I have just an educated guess as to why there's that NY9 stone you showed at the beginning of the presentation, and
Okay.
I'm gonna guess because the Albany Post Road, which also was Broadway in the Bronx going through Riverdale, that is also New York State Route 9. So that's my guess as to why that stone might be there. I'm not sure
Well,
exactly where.
I don't know because those state road designations were made long after that stone was produced. So
Probably true.
that stone goes back to the early 1800s at
All right, then
least.
that certainly predates the roads, but that Broadway is US 9, either US 9 or New York State 9, going all the way up to Albany and beyond. Actually, Route 9 goes all the way to the Canadian border, I believe.
Yep, almost all the way.
But otherwise, excellent presentation. Thank you, and I enjoyed it also because I'm married to a lady who grew up in the Bronx.
Well, remember, we've
Great.
got another one coming up on Wednesday night. I'll try to get to that a little later.
Okay, let's see here. Um, okay. Uh, Tom Casey, I'm gonna go ahead and give you permission to talk. I see your hand up next. And then we'll do some more Q&A as well. Got a lot of interesting comments and questions. Let me see. All right. Let's see if we can hear you, Tom.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh,
I hear
yes,
you.
we can.
Yeah, I just want to mention that the 9 Mile Stone is in Manhattan. I think the first stone by the King's Bridge was around the 14th mile, something like that.
I
So,
see. I see. So
yeah.
the milestone. I guess it could be that it's not even from the Bronx. Is that what you're saying, Tom?
Yes, if you look at the Cole's map of right around 1776, have all the milestones marked off, and I think I'm talking off the top of my head. I think the 16th or the 18th mile marker. 18th might have been New Rochelle. The 16th might have been by St. Paul's Church in
Interesting.
Eastchester. Yeah, and of
Interesting.
course, yeah. Very,
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
I'd like
possible.
I'd like to see that map. Maybe I'll look it up.
I'll email it to you.
All right.
Thank you, Tom.
There are a
Yes,
couple
very
of milestones. I think the 11-mile marker is of the Kingsbridge Road is in the Jamel Mansion yard, and the 12-mile marker is embedded in a stone fence outside of Isham
Anyway.
Park.
Okay, let's see. Tom, would you like to say anything else? I know you added a couple other things in the Q&A.
Oh yeah, there were the two trolley poles, one on Cedric Avenue. The actual address is on 3159 Kingsbridge Terrace, and there's another trolley pole on Webster, kind of Webster and Bainbridge Avenue.
Oh, I'd like to see those. Can you send me the locations a little later?
Yes, yeah, and you still see it back and forth in Google Street Maps. You can go back in time. I'll send you the link.
Very,
Very good.
very great.
Very good.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
You're
Let's
welcome.
see here. Okay. Kevin, remind me of the folks that you wanted to give a blurb. Let me see if any of them have their hands up. There's
Is Debbie Van Cura in the house? Because I know Deanne had to leave.
okay. I'm not sure. Let me see. Debbie, if you're in the house, just raise your hand. I don't see you here. There's Seth Asher has their hand up. Bob Halbin. Either of those names ring a bell?
No, but
Okay,
I'm always happy to hear from people whom I don't know.
Okay, yeah, let's see, Seth. We'll go ahead and give you permission to talk, and then we'll do Bob. Then we'll go back to a few more of the Q&A.
Okay. All right, Kevin, I'm tremendously enjoying this presentation. Thank you. And I also enjoy your books. You mentioned the cooperative houses in the Northwest Bronx, the amalgamated houses and the Shalom Aleichem houses and the Frabant and the coops, the Allerton coops, all from the 1927 era. There's a fourth one in the area. Do you know what I'm referring to?
If you say what the name is, I probably will recognize it.
The Farband houses. They're near the. It was built by labor Zionists at the same period, and they're near the Allerton Coops on Matthews Avenue off of Williamsbridge Road. It's a short walk from the Allerton Coops.
Well, I'm gonna jot that down.
And Seth, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe that they're also still a cooperative to this day. Them and Amalgamated are the only two that are. Shalem Aleichem and the Coops aren't, of course. But is that correct, Seth? Is that how you understand it too?
That I don't know. But I could add that the gates to the alleys and courtyards of the Frabant houses still has a very handsome F scroll in the wrought iron gates.
So I'm taking notes. I'm gonna take a look at this on Street View if I can't get up there anytime.
Another detail about the Shalom Aleichem houses is that when they went, they didn't survive, like you just said, they didn't survive our host just mentioned, they didn't survive the Depression, the crash and whatnot. But in mass, a large group of the Shalom Aleichem residents came into a building at Amalgamated that went up in the early 30s. Building number 9 on Van Cortlandt Park South. And that building at a time had a reputation as housing the intelligentsia, because this whole group of Yiddishists that were cultured and people that were attracted by a house that was named after a great Yiddish writer. They came in mass to this building in in the early 1930s when it went up, just around the time that Shalom Aleichem failed.
Very
Uh,
interesting.
Seth, you mentioned the Allerton Coops. Is that how you pronounce it? Not Allerton Co-ops?
Yeah, it has, as our host, who's an expert on this, can say, it's pronounced. It has that odd pronunciation, Coops.
But you don't call it Coop City though.
No, no, Co-op City. I think that's
Yeah.
the only Coops usage of that word that I know of.
Same here,
Boy,
Seth. Same
learn
here.
something new all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, interestingly enough, maybe this is going too far down the rabbit hole, but there's so much about the history of cooperative housing in the Bronx that could be said. But Shalem Aleichem, a very obscure thing about it is there's somewhat prominent uh well, he was really a theorist of many things, ecology. He was kind of an anarchist theorist. Murray Bookchin, who lived in the Shalem Aleichem for a period of time, and his philosophy, in a very unpredictable way, actually influenced. It's a part of Syria right now that's in the news because Turkey is trying to, grab up part of it, Rojava, and it influenced the way that they've organized, or at least tried to organize some things there. So it's, a person from the Bronx, from the Shalem Aleichem houses, who's, having this interesting impact. But there's so many interesting people who lived at Shalem Aleichem.
Yeah, but an illustrious roster. I'll add quickly. I know I'm going on and on, but the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Mass, has video library of oral histories, and Yvette Marin, who grew up in the Shalom Aleichem houses, she has a piece up there talking about the salon nights that would be held, and lectures and dances and a cafeteria. And much the same could be said about the amalgamated houses at Vladik Hall, named for Baruch Vladik. There too, there were all kinds of events and literary events, dance, music, singing, theatrical performances, because they were such tight-knit and cultured communities, working class, but people that really valued those riches in those cultural riches in their lives.
Absolutely,
Well, it's
absolutely,
a beautiful
Seth.
area. We brought a tour up there a few years ago. We loved it up there.
Okay, thank you, Seth. Let me see here. So we'll do one more hand and then maybe two more questions and call it a night. There's a lot more questions and comments left, but not sure if we can get to all of them. Let me see. Joan, I saw you had your hand up for a while, then put it down, then put it back up. Let's go ahead and give you permission.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
thank you so much, Steve, for organizing. And Kevin, this was the most incredible presentation. I was born in the Bronx in 1948. And what you covered with the Bronx was like going through my life history. I mean, it was just amazing. From me playing tennis at the Oval to my father being a policeman at the 52nd Precinct to, I just could go on and on. So I just want to thank you so very much for that. And living in Little Belfast, I grew up on Marion Avenue and Marshallou Parkway. And I remember very clearly the IRA signs in the windows of storefronts. And yeah, just amazing. I mean, this kind of history needs to get out there. I just wish that growing up, I knew more about it at the time. So thank you very much. One kind of question that I had, which is just, so I went to Mount St. Ursula on Bedford Park Boulevard, and of course, Fordham Prep and Mount St. Ursula there was a soda shop. I think it was on the corner of Webster and Fordham Road. And I'm still in touch with some folks after all these years. I'm 76 now, but we used to call it the H. I don't know if you know about it or what the real name of that is. We're all challenging each other to find out the real name of that soda shop. So maybe you could.
Was it open in the 40s, do you think?
Oh, it was because I was in high school in the 60s.
Okay, here's what you do.
What?
There's a website called 1940s New York. I think if you Google it, it'll get you the exact web address for that.
Okay.
It's a map on which are links going back to tax photos of New York City in the 1940s. And if you
Okay.
go to that corner and you click on the dot on that corner, you can see what the building looked like
What it
in
was.
1940. And you know, if there was a soda fountain there, you'll be able to see it.
All right. Well, I'll check that out. Oh, now the last comment I want to make is back in my time too, that whole Belmont area, I also worked at Montefiore Hospital, and we used to always go to Arthur Avenue and go to this particular wonderful restaurant. I was a fan of Adeo's Bakery, but Dion and the Belmonts were a big deal back in that time down there on Belmont Avenue.
Oh, that's where he
So-
was born.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This was the most enjoyable, wonderful thing.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you. And feel free if you you know, need some assistance on hopefully finding the name of that shop, feel free to send me an email and I can look further into it for you. And
All right.
know,
Well, I'll be in touch because I'm a fan of the Historical Society and a supporter. Thank you.
thank you, Joan. Have a good
Bye.
night. Okay, let's see. We'll just try and round it out with a couple more questions or comments here. There's a lot, so I'll just
Oh,
sorry
by the
I
way,
have
did
to
you get to 100 people on this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay,
For most
very
of the
good.
time there were 114, 115 people logged
All
in.
right, very
So
good.
now here's an interesting one. Speaking of Adeo's, this is from Evie Mayer. There's an Adeo's Pizza on Riverdale Avenue, and they say he is the grandson of the original Adeo. Do you know much about that, Kevin, or have you heard that before?
I cannot verify that. No.
That's interesting though. Yeah, I've seen that listed. I might have passed by it before too. I think it's Evie, where in Riverdale? I think it's pretty far up on Riverdale Avenue, but I forget off the top of my head.
Well,
Let me
there's dough involved with both of them.
Yes, that's right. Oh, this is a very interesting and detailed comment from George. Let's see here. What also needs to be noted about the Phillip House is that Lord Howe, the colonial governor, along with his brother Geoffrey, the senior military commander in North America, were the two Britons who met with Franklin, John Adams, and John Rutherford, who had been rowed from Perth Amboy to Staten Island for the conference. The Patriots were also told that none would be hanged or tried as traitors if the nascent U.S. were to come back under the British Empire. Okay, so little just further details on what you said, Kevin, I
Well, Ben
believe.
Franklin said, we've all got to hang together, otherwise we'll hang separately.
That's right. Okay, let's see here. Oh, Evie, it's across from the Skyview Shopping Center, the Adeo's Pizza. Oh, and they tell their history on their website. So that's an interesting little bit here. And then let's see. We'll close it off with maybe one more live comment from Suzanne. Let me go ahead and allow you to talk, Suzanne.
Oh, that's
right.
Suzanne Stombley. I went to school with Suzanne.
Okay, let me ask Suzanne to unmute here. Let's see. Hopefully that'll work. Let me try again. Oh, here we go.
Hello?
Hi, Suzanne. Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Hey, Suzanne, you there? Yeah, having a little trouble with the mic, I guess.
Maybe so. Huh.
Trouble with the
Well,
mic, I guess.
Suzanne,
Hello?
type in your.
Oh, okay. We hear you, Suzanne.
Hi, I just wanted to say I went to school with Kevin. And
Yeah, I went to
remember-
school with Suzanne. I haven't talked to you since 1971. How are you?
Yeah, right.
It's
so nice
it's only been 55 years.
It's so nice to hear your voice. And as the woman before me said, you really bring alive all of our memories. And I just want to say, I remember from the time we were in grammar school, maybe 6, 7 years old, between the bridge being built and the lamppost drawings you did. It was always in his blood, and I'm so honored to get this presentation. And happy 25 years, but I know it's much more longer than that. You had this love affair with the city.
Yeah, I've had this in the back of my head since the 60s, really.
Really, best wishes, and you're the best. You bring alive a lot of my memories too, because my father was in the carpet business, and I used to ride with him on estimates. And when you put together the slices, it brings back the best of all memories. Thank you so much.
Well, Suzanne's dad's name is on a street sign in Bay Ridge.
Yes, yes, it was a big honor because he helped develop the Sunset Park area in terms of getting a security detail there and aligning businessmen with the community services, and the mayor Giuliani at the time made a great investment to bring that area safe enough for them to conduct business, because it was so unsafe at the time. A lot of the merchants were being harmed. So we were very proud to see how it developed over the years.
Well, my mother always said, Kev, don't ride your bike into Sunset Park. That's where the bad boys are.
Yeah,
But,
right. It was, well, once they built the highway, it really changed the whole neighborhood. Like you've always said, it just sliced across our whole neighborhood. And then they put the elevated highway, and life changed. We no longer had sunlight in front of his shop, and the area did go downhill because of that. But now
yeah,
it's
they dismissed
regenerated.
my house with the Gowanus Expressway. It was built across the street from me.
Exactly. It just took out part of Bay Ridge and all the way down. But now there's such a revitalization in that neighborhood. It's excited to see how even the Gowanus is making a comeback.
All right, Suzanne, if you ever make it down to Florida, I'll look you up.
Yes, please do. We'd love to see you. Be well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Suzanne. And like I said, there's unfortunately too many questions and answers to treat all of them. Kind of have done a smattering. But please, if you have a burning question that wasn't answered tonight, please feel free to send it to me, and then I can relay it to Kevin. Or Kevin, if you don't mind me sharing your email address in the follow-up email with folks who registered, I can do that. It's up to you, though.
All right, I'm at Kevin Jude Walsh at gmail.com.
Great. And
I should mention I'm doing a live show Wednesday night at Greater Astoria Historical Society Holiday Party. I don't have the exact address, but you know what? You go to astorialic@gmail.com and inquire at that address where it is, and you'll be able to see me, and I'll be doing a live presentation based on Astoria as well as 1999-2000.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much again, Kevin. Really enjoyed tonight's presentation. Thank you to those party folks who stuck around to the very end. Still around 45 people logged in. So pretty good to last this long with that crowd.
Well, this is by far the biggest crowd I've had for any of these presentations.
Well, thank you again, Kevin, and congratulations on 25 years of a really great website and book series and photographs, as you mentioned, an outstanding legacy. And look forward to additional presentations by you.
Yeah, hopefully we'll do another one in 2025. We'll see.
Absolutely. All right. Take care,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.